All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today with a really important episode with somebody who is working with the Scientist Rebellion. For all of those out there that don't know who this is an activist group. It's very important. We've got scientist Kyle Topfer. How you doing, Kyle?
I'm right. How you doing, Chris?
Oh, I've been better. The world's in shambles.
It is.
But we're trying to stay calm. So you have worked in a lot of different areas. You have been studying air and noise pollution. You know, checking out contaminated water. You've also worked on some green energy kind of battery technology, stuff like that. Is that true?
That's all true, yeah. So I was working in Australia for about 4 years in the first two fields you mentioned, in air and noise pollution, and then in contaminated land and water assessment. And then I was working in Germany for 1 year or 2 years just before I started with Scientist Rebellion on solar and battery storage. Yeah.
Fantastic. And you from the UK, Australia? Where are you from originally?
Originally from Sydney, yep. Sydney, Australia.
Australia, down under. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I got to make it down there one day.
You know what? I managed to, when I moved to Germany just before the pandemic, so I managed to avoid most of the flood and fire chaos that hit Australia, and then the whole pandemic situation as well. And now there's been a bunch more floods this year. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like Australia is poised to have a lot of trouble in the future.
Yes.
Yeah. Considering too, the middle of Australia is basically a no man's land, where isn't it? It's like some kind of coming of age ritual or some kind of challenge in order to drive through the middle of it. Is that even possible?
I've done it actually. Well, I've been from the centre of Australia in Alice Springs. There's a town there with about 50,000 people, and then I've driven all the way north from there, which is about 1,800 kilometres or something like that. It's about 1,200 miles. And yeah, you basically don't see anyone the entire drive. It's quite fascinating and scary, and a lot of things at once. Yeah.
Sounds scary. Yeah. I do it. I'm crazy. I do it. So yeah, this is an important thing here. You know, there's a lot of climate activist groups out there doing a lot. People are doing all kinds of different actions, anything they can do at the moment. So what is exactly the Scientist Rebellion, and what are your strategies that you're using?
Yeah, so I mean, Scientist Rebellion is a group of academics, scientists, students, sympathizers with Scientist Rebellion, where we're trying to activate people and get them to follow the science and not just talk like it's real, but actually act like it. We've been hearing these warnings for 30, 40, 50 years of what's coming down the track, and the reality is it's here now. We're already approaching tipping points in both the climate and the ecological system. We're looking at some really nasty things coming down the line in the global north, and in the global south, millions of people are already suffering. Right now, Pakistan is still half underwater with 33 million people, I think it was, evacuated. We've had events all around the world now. So we know, as well as ecological and climatic tipping points, there's also social ones, where if a small dedicated number of people see a great injustice in society and start agitating for change, it can, through enough disruption, but also that they've got to have a moral point as well. It can reach a point, and so to speak, a tipping point, where suddenly a lot more people start agreeing with the need for change and agitating for it, and you can reach a point where change is possible. So I think Scientist Rebellion, there's a theory called the theory of the pillars of society, where you've got different parts of society, different pillars, so to speak, like holding up a temple. And the temple is obviously, in that case, stable, well-formed society. And the pillars go to supporting that in a democratic sense. The pillars I'm speaking about are science, churches, especially in the past, they've been an important pillar of society. Unions, trade unions, schools, and sort of the education system, and politics would be another one. The media would be another one. There's a few of them, and I guess we're trying to activate our pillar of society, and within each pillar, within that room, you've got things like gatekeepers, which essentially hold the conversation and hold the discourse from progressing, so to speak. And then you've got people that agitate actively for that to change. We're trying to discredit the people that are stopping the necessary change from happening in society, and especially within the scientific community. And we're trying to activate and give voice to those people on change, because the reality is change is not just necessary, but I would argue inevitable at this stage. After all these warnings, after so much time, we are really reaching a peak where, in the very near future, total chaos is going to be unleashed on society, and we need to really get a grip on the situation, speak honestly with each other, and reach for the measures that will really protect lives and protect communities.
Yeah. And so the strategies that you're using in the time being, you're actually doing things that are quite controversial. What you used a great word, agitating, which I'm all for, but what are some of the strategies that you're using, and how are they panning out?
Yeah, so, I would be very broad in my definition when I say that you've got traditional sort of not NGO style protests where people will, go on a march or sign petitions or hand out leaflets, and that stuff's all great. But we've had sort of a long process of that now, many decades, 30, 40 years now, and that has not been successful. So you've got to be realistic and look at what other forms of societal engagement there are, what forms of societal protest have been effective in the past. And looking at examples throughout history, you've got things like the suffragettes, anti-colonial struggles, the civil rights movement, gay rights movement in the 80s and 90s, the anti-atomic weapons movement. You've got several really good concrete examples, and the tactics that they used were generally quite disruptive. And at the time, it's very easy to look back at them from our position now, and think, wow, that they were totally right morally. Of course, everyone would have liked them, but no, they didn't. Why? Because they were disruptive. Disruptive protest is effective if you've also got support from a wider sense in the community that actually what they're agitating for has a good basis for us agreeing with them and thinking it's true, even if we don't like the tactics. Those tactics throughout, so I mean, this obviously forms civil disobedience or civil resistance, and those tactics vary quite a lot based on the particular circumstances, the particular time in history, and so on. And I mean, obviously, recently you've seen Just Stop Oil, which is a group in the UK, or Last Generation, which is a group in Germany, throwing soup and throwing mashed potato on paintings. On the glass covering in front of paintings. Yeah. Someone actually tried this with the Mona Lisa last year, or early in this year, I think it was, another climate activist that's not associated with the group. But this particular tactics that Scientists Rebellion have been using is, as I said, we're trying to appeal to the scientific community. And one very effective protest form that we have is pasting of scientific papers on government buildings, on large corporations. And what I mean by that is, a bit of wheat paste, get a big, A4 or A3 or A2 scientific paper, print it out, and make your point through. It's not just demonstrative; it is also disruptive, and it gives you the chance to sort of say, okay, you've been ignoring, the scientific literature for 20, 30, 40 years. Here it is. And you can't ignore it anymore. It's now glued to your front windows. That's one form. But obviously the main sort of media critical action form is blocking of roads. And that is not a new action form. That has been used for 100 years, from suffragettes to even the civil rights movement was occasionally blocking roads. It can be quite an effective form of protest. Other action forms that we've tried, we've also had hunger strikes. We've also had, people gluing on in showrooms, in car showrooms, for example, or inside government buildings, demanding, very basic demands. That's the other part of this is, a lot of the demands that are being asked for by these different groups, and especially from Scientists Rebellion, are really straightforward, simple, easy, effective socially just demands that are sort of basically just common sense, and that's part of it. Is you show your opponent up as if you're respectful, if you still engage in dialogue and you say, this is so important to us, to our families, to our societies, everyone we care about, why aren't you implementing this? And it's not sort of, we're not begging anymore. We're openly, actively disrupting because it's so necessary that change happens now.
And do you think that this is going to continue to intensify because certain media outlets and certain groups and stuff have now kind of turned their back on you as well? Because they used to kind of pander to you at least a little bit, but now corporate interests are completely kind of reversed it now. Have you found that the media has kind of switched its narrative about you guys and climate change?
I mean, I'm in Germany, and I'm quite focused on the campaigns we've done in Germany. My impression isn't that the media are turning away from us or shutting us down or shutting down the discourse here particularly. It's obviously the case that there are sections of the media that will not report on our actions until they have an attack line, so to speak, to try and discredit us. That especially with the various actions we've done recently in Germany, as soon as there's sort of a line of attack that some of these media organizations see, they'll go for it. And that's nothing new either. There were plenty of media organizations calling Martin Luther King a terrorist and, rounding up sympathizers in the far left or the far right or whatever it was. I mean, this dynamic is not new. Disruption is uncomfortable, and it asks a moral question of us, and Freud was of the opinion that sort of denial is. Hang on, I'm just going to very quickly pull this up because I've actually got it here, and I think it's quite important to say this. Mm-hmm. Just give me 1 second here.
Yeah.
Denial, according to Freud. Freud was interested in the knowledge we do not allow ourselves to know or can only know under certain conditions. Therefore, he mapped how we split, we disavow, we deny, or we simply negate in order to maintain our psychic balance. So we have ways of only half knowing or of half allowing a thought in, on condition that it is simultaneously negated or perhaps projected into something or someone else, given a room in the house, so long as it does not implicate me. And another point about denial is, by denial, individuals cope with their stresses by not acknowledging their reality and or its consequences. This can range from common resistance to accept the consequences of certain events to full-on psychotic denial, in which even denial of physical aspects of immediate surroundings can happen. And I think a lot of us can relate to a lot of aspects there, and that does explain a lot of the negative reaction. And the very final point I would make on this is the phenomenon shooting the messenger is, a lot of us like to pretend or think that we're immune to this, but this is a very deep human trait, and it takes a lot of
conditioning.
Conditioning, but also reflection on to be able to move past this. But this is the phenomenon where if any bad news comes our way, first on we attack the person that's telling us, or the person bringing the message. And that's especially true if we're uncertain of their motivations, why they're doing it. When we become aware of their motivations, and in the case of scientists, for example, it would be, we're scared too, that that our families are going to starve as well, that our families are going to be sent to defend borders, and that not going to have enough water and they're going to die in a heat wave, and that's the real motivation for saying, it can't keep going on like this. There has to be a point where society comes to grips with the reality of the situation, and that's why disruptive protest is an effective way of moving the discourse towards that necessary point.
Yeah. And the people out there that are saying, yeah, whatever, let me tell you something. The next step is Weatherman Underground. The next step is Ted Kaczynski. You're going to find, hopefully people like this coming out of the woodwork. We don't want it to get to that point.
If I could just very quickly make a point there is, the literature is pretty clear that nonviolent protest and disruption and nonviolent direct action is more effective, almost twice as effective as any violent action or terrorist group or anything. So it's even strategically more sensible to remain a non-violent movement. And if I could even in the cases where a terrorist group or a violent group is in quotation marks effective and actually manages to gain some initiative or even a full-on revolution or a coup, in most cases within 5 years or so, what they initially set out to do, the regime they create tends to be, authoritarian, fall in on itself, descend into civil war. We saw this in Russia, for example, in 1917 and 1922. And this is a phenomenon that has happened dozens of times in history. Right. So it's not just strategically sensible for winning, but even when you do win, if you were to go down the terrorist or violent route, you don't end up getting a result that you actually, want.
That's where we got authoritative communism, was this idea that everybody's equal and it's all love and peace. And if you say anything against it, I'll kill you.
Exactly.
But I'm speaking only to the desperation of escalating, the frustrations we have to a higher and higher degree, where you think, well, it's getting more and more important, and I'm losing my mind just a little bit more and more every day. What's the logical? And that brings me, I'll just skip ahead to that question. And so there are laws currently passed right now, namely in the UK, that have strengthened the punishment for protesting, which is huge. Will civil disobedience still work if they start locking activists up for longer durations, doing very kind of fascist stuff? And at what point, in your opinion, in your organization's opinion, should we escalate? At what point? And which direction do we go?
Yeah. So I think it's important to say we're trying to escalate in a non-violent way now.
Of course.
And that was the thinking behind the current set of actions that we've going on. We've formed a coalition with a couple of other groups here in Germany, where we're all sort of piling in together, combining our resources, combining our strength, and trying to push for that change now. And I think it's there's nothing set in stone here, but I think it's absolutely possible that if you get in a big important Western democracy, if you get a result in terms of a real legislative change coming through a sustained period of disruption from civil disobedience groups, I think it's entirely possible that other countries will be watching what happens. And we saw this with Extinction Rebellion in 2018-19, that they were blocking bridges for 5 weeks. And they got the UK government to declare a climate emergency. Extinction Rebellion exploded. I think they had a couple of thousand in the UK just before their first big waves of protests. Within a few months, they had 300,000 members across Europe, for example. Right. So I think it is entirely possible that it's sort of a chain reaction like that across different countries would happen. Now, in terms of what the UK is actually doing to criminalize protest, and I'm from Australia. I watch with a keen interest what happens there as well. There's quite oppressive forces at play there as well. There's some protests being organised by a group called Blockade Australia, and they were talking about 25 people being watched by the not the Secret Service, but by sort of more authoritative police forces just watching what they were doing. Not even whilst they were going to a protest. So, I mean, it is unfortunately the case that there will be this negative reaction, and there's calls for that here in Germany as well. But at the same time, I think history does show that, and this is an innate feature of a lot of almost all humans, that we don't like seeing injustice and standing by and watching it happen. I think we have an inherent desire to see what we think is fair and just happen, and a lot of people will be looking at what's going on and saying, well, these people shouldn't be disrupting. These people shouldn't be spraying paint on buildings and blocking roads and gluing to cars. But at the same time, they're just trying to look out for their families. Why is the government, pushing for these insane new powers to I think the one they were talking about in the UK was like, if you've been to a protest in the last two years or something, they can watch you for 5 years, or it might be the other way around.
Well, in April 2022, they passed a new law that said varying degrees of protest laws that were unheard of up until that point. And then, they've been enforcing that, especially with the Queen's funeral and stuff. If anybody was just standing there with a blank sign or was just holding eggs, they could officially now get rid of them. And the Extinction Rebellion themselves had this great success, but then turned around and were marked as terrorist group for a short period of time until they went to court and had it reversed. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, the what do you call them? The Interior Ministry, or I guess the Interior Ministry of Germany, the Verfassungsschutz. Interestingly enough, the High Court made a decision that the current plans of the German government in terms of reducing emissions was basically anti-democratic, right, and was going to undermine the rule of law in Germany. So, but then on the other side of the equation, there have been people within politics calling for last generation who have been blocking roads and disrupting to be criminalized much further. And it's kind of like, well, you can't have both. Either the government is currently acting against their own constitutional mandate, or they're not, and therefore these people have no right to be disruptive. But it's a perfectly
It's because it's this perfect purgatory of policy making where they don't have to. They can just sit on the fence. They're doing that in Germany as we speak with cannabis.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Funny.
Yeah, which I love.
Right.
So let me ask you this: there's a lot of talk about green energy, blah blah blah, solar, wind, nuclear, whatever, alternative ways. Is this going to be enough? Are we going to be able to do business as usual if we just switch to these green energies, or are we going to have to actually think about system change and consumption habit changes as people?
Yeah. So, Scientist Rebellion doesn't have a clear position on this. Doesn't have a set position on this.
Okay.
So speaking as an environmental scientist that has spoken with quite a number of experts on various topics, it's absolutely not the case that we can just carry on business as usual. We're just going to build some solar panels and some wind turbines and some batteries and everything's fine. We need a radical change in the entire economy. That the IPCC is an extremely conservative group of scientists. They've been saying that for a couple of years now, and have said it very strongly in their latest reports last year and this year. It's absolutely imperative. This is me speaking from my own understanding of the research and literature. It's not going to be possible for us to reduce emissions fast enough to be able to stay under 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees, which is now written in stone in the Paris Agreement, that governments are bound to do that by law. It's not possible to stay under those temperature limits if the bigger rich economies in the global north continue to pursue economic growth at the rates that they've been doing for the last few decades. It's not going to be possible. And if you have a look at this year, 2022, new renewable energy only covered 107% of energy demand growth. That means that all of the demand growth this year was covered, and another 7% on top of that. So you can obviously see the problem here. The bigger the economy gets, and GDP is quite tightly coupled to rising energy and resource use. If you're growing the economy every year, that means you're growing the demand of energy every year. That means you're running behind yourself. You're running up an escalator that's going downhill, trying to build renewables fast enough. What we need to do, and the IPCC have said this, is we need to cut emissions rapidly. And the way you can do that is by shutting unnecessary parts of the economy that don't actually contribute to human well-being. They're only there for the capitalist class to increase their share of the wealth pie. And there I'm talking about things like SUVs, private jets, marketing.
Casinos, malls.
Right, yeah, the industrial military complex. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a big one, yeah.
Right, yeah. And actually that is something that needs to be talked about more well, is firstly that wealthier people are emitting massively more emissions than sort of less wealthier people in society. So I think 10%, the richest 10% of human society, and that's true within countries and globally, approximately 10% are responsible for about 45% of emissions. So, one of the very first most effective policies would be to reduce the purchasing power of the richest people of society. Because, they've got multiple houses which they're heating, they've got multiple yachts and planes and cars and all the rest of it, and the consumption habits. But also, they also control more of the shares of companies. They have more of a say in the way politics is run. Mm-hmm. They have more democratic say because they have more ability to be able to talk to and give money to higher parts of the political sphere. Mm-hmm. So it's at every level, it's an unfair, undemocratic system. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is when we get to the next question, which is about capitalism, and capitalism being this monster that just happened, can't be slowed down. And with what you just said about money specifically in politics, at some level of income that these people have, first of all, they can't say no to money. And secondly, if they spend money on lobbying for policy change, they're going to win every time, because it's like starting Monopoly, where you get $1 and I get the rest of the money, and then we'll see who wins. But capitalism is an economic system. What it does is promotes the idea of constant and exponential growth with no slowdowns for the shareholders. In your opinion, is this compatible with the current concerns involving the environment, biodiversity? A rhetorical question, I guess.
Yeah. Wait, it's obviously not. We've seen, 50% of all CO2 emissions that have ever occurred since the industrial age have occurred since the first IPCC report in 1990. We've lost 70% of all animals, the total biomass of animals, since the 1970s. And this is sort of the era of supposedly, great progress. And don't get me wrong, there has been progress in a lot of areas. But if it undermines the fundamental natural systems on which we all rely, it's obviously not going to be enough. So I think this exponential growth function, we've seen this through the pandemic, how dangerous that can be if you allow an exponentially multiplying problem, exponentially worsening problem to manifest itself without getting on top of it early. We've seen the damage that can wreak, and the same is true of collapsing ecosystems and a worsening climate. So it's often sort of talked about by green capitalists that, like I said before, we can just build a bunch of solar panels and wind farms and batteries and then we're good. No, we've got 9 planetary boundaries. I can't remember them all exactly off the top of my head, but the important ones to note is we're transgressing 6 of them at least. And ozone was a big problem, but we dealt with that. That's one of the planetary boundaries. But you've got other ones that are sort of interlinked: biodiversity loss and CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions is also coupled with another planetary boundary, which is the acidifications of the oceans. You've got biodiversity loss is a second massive problem that is sort of interlinked with climate change, because climate change worsens the biodiversity loss in that it changes habitat, it moves and destabilizes ecosystems. And we are totally, utterly reliant. And this is why I cannot understand why people can't get their head around it. We are absolutely fundamentally coupled with the living world. We breathe the air. We need these microorganisms in the soil that allow the plants to grow that we eat. We need clean drinking water, which has thousands and millions of bacteria and microorganisms. We are absolutely fundamentally reliant on a habitable planet that is also crucial for all other life. Undermining that system is the most insane, irrational thing you can do, and that's what we're doing right now.
It's stupid. That's what it is. It's stupid. And what you made at the beginning of our discussion, you mentioned that there, society is this thing up here, and there's these pillars that keep all this. There's society, church, and the law, and all these things. At the bottom of that is one big pillar, and that's biodiversity.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, the natural world.
So, and that's one of the main reasons I had you on, because my frustration with this, and I think, is this too abstract for people to accept? But now that I've talked to you and we talked about denial and everything, it's clear that we got our work cut out for, and that we can't stop, and we have to stay optimistic against all odds. But, I had the great Richard Wilkinson on the program 2 nights ago, and he said economics is a mental illness, So I wanted to ask you finally, too, with the world the way it is, I mean, it's not easy. How do you relax? How do you stay calm? How do you find some enjoyment?
Yeah, I'm not particularly good on this front. It's especially as an environmental scientist, when I was working in the field before I joined Scientist Rebellion, it was a constant battle with myself to stay optimistic and sort of not distract myself, but free myself from sort of the notion that, what we're doing to the world around us, to the people we love, is totally overwhelming. But what I try and do is get out into nature as much as possible, and enjoy the natural world that is there. The animals are beautiful. The water's fantastic. The mountains are gorgeous. It's all wonderful stuff. I love to read as well. I think reading is a super important thing that, unfortunately, it seems a lot of people are too distracted or too busy to really put the time in, and don't seem to enjoy it as much as perhaps in eras gone by. In my personal life, I'll be honest, I'm quite a bit of a train spotter. I love trains and trams and all types of rail vehicles. I don't know why, I've always loved it. I love riding it, watching it, looking at how, even sort of looking at maps and saying, okay, how would I solve the transport problems that these cities have? I've done that for various cities around the world, just as a sort of a thought experiment. So I think, it's important to have these kind of hobbies and distractions and things that keep you going and keep you interested and allow you to make connections with other people. And one final point I would make is that through, Scientist Rebellion and my involvement with activism, I've met some amazing people and been able to go and stay with them, for example, and get to see parts of places that you wouldn't normally have got to see if you were just a tourist so I think that's sort of an important point to make, is that there are positive sides to sort of the work Scientist Rebellion and other groups are doing. The community, the bonds that you make are wonderful and fantastic, and that keeps you going.
So you've been to some pretty nice places?
Yeah, I've been to, a lot of Germany now, and I've seen a fair bit of Europe as well. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. And when you say train spotting, have you ever hopped a freight train before?
I haven't done it when they've been moving fast. I've done it when they've been sort of moving a couple of kilometers an hour, walking pace.
You go town to town or something?
No, nothing like that. Okay. I love watching those videos though.
Yeah.
There's a guy that did like trips across Russia and Turkey and some amazing places jumping on trains. Yeah.
Killer.
Yeah.
Well, that's my background. I did a lot of hoboing in my early days when I was in my youth. So
cool.
Good fun. So when you say trains, I get excited. I go, ooh,
yeah.
Train. All right. Well, Kyle Topfer, he's going to come back and he's going to hang out with us and give us the update. And in the future, things are going to be better and we're going to feel better than we do right now.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. All right. Say goodbye.